From Wall Street to Main Street to help small business owners have the same capital as corporate America and give them the same resources as a larger company. We cover business funding, business credit, scaling, business consulting, and much more. Check out the website at shieldadvisorygroup.com. Welcome to the show, The Liquid Lunch Project.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Liquid Lunch Project. I am Matthew R. Meehan alongside my partner, the Professor Luigi Rosabianca. What's on tap today, Lou?
Matt, ask yourself, what are the two things that small business owners want to achieve? We go through it all the time, but when we break it down, it's two things. We want to forge our brand, we want to create that goodwill, we want to create that notoriety, and we want to drive revenue. Right? We want to make the world a better place. We want to take care of our families. And today on the podcast, we've got Michael Doyle, founder and CEO of Brand Iron. And guess what? That's their mantra. They want to forge brands and drive revenue. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Michael, I love having you on the podcast because I tend to be the longest one in the teeth, if you know what I mean, on these podcasts. So finally, I've got a contemporary. So you've been around the block a couple of times. Tell us, what was the brainchild of Brand Iron?
Actually, the brainchild of Brand Iron, my previous firm, I built it up and I sold it as a part of a public IPO. And I served a couple of years reporting to Wall Street with this other firm. And then when it was time to leave and go do my own thing again, I wanted to have a company. All the other companies at the time were very high tech and very cutting edge. And I want to say is, you know what? I just got through reporting a couple of years to Wall Street. It really, at the end of the day, it's all about results. And how do you produce results? How do you quantify results? How do you communicate message about your results? And so I really had this idea is like, you know what, we can combine traditional branding and marketing that's typically fluffy with, hard cutting facts, hard cutting results, and we can blend those two together. And so that's how we came up with Brand Iron and forging brands and driving revenue, is taking those two things which were traditionally not commonly known to be together between branding and marketing and looks and feels of companies, and then true hard cutting results.
Michael, this is the tendency. When you go to larger firms, they tend to have a marketing and branding department, right? They have a communications and investor relations department, right? And then you've got sales. You found this beautiful way of sort of connecting this spider web of intricate pieces that have to be connected. These are not independent. Like, your brand has to drive your revenue, and the revenue is driving your brand. So kind of walk us through how you found this beautiful spider web lattice of Brand Iron.
Yeah, I say to people, it's part of what I call your holistic brand. But in order for it to be holistic, it's not just a cool looking logo or a cool looking website. It's defining what your brand wants to be. And my philosophy is quite a bit different. Let me say that. I tell people a brand starts with your business goals and objectives. What are you trying to achieve? What is the end outcome? How do you package? How do you define your differentiators? How do you define your value points and your value proposition? How do you help build that into a brand, a position, a message, a look and a feel that's going to resonate with your ideal target customers? Then how do you develop what I call a marketing and sales process, from everything from your brand look and feel to the website, to what your digital strategy is, what your social media strategy is, what is your sales strategy, and how does your marketing and sales all come together? And then how do you put together like a technology platform and run it on a technology platform so you can track and measure all the effectiveness of all these different things? So you can track and measure and determine what your spend is, or an ROI on your brand, your marketing, and your sales, and look at the entire sales funnel and say that this is holistic in nature. And we've developed a brand, a position, the process from a marketing and sales perspective, and then the technology platform that it's built upon to be able to track and measure whether this thing's working or not. And that's what true brands are all about. Isn't just about cool logos or commercials or websites, but it is the entire experience, defining what that experience wants to be, communicating what that is, not only externally to the outside world, but internally within your own employee base, making sure they understand the brand, make sure they understand how do we deliver on that, how do we create what I call great brand experiences. And by being able to do all these things together in combination is how you not only deliver those great brand experiences, but deliver great brand results.
Now, Michael, what you described to us is small business utopia. But the reality is you've got a guy that wakes up early in the morning, rolls up his sleeves, and he's yelling at his sales staff to sell more. And he's yelling at his manufacturing plant to make more. And he's yelling at his office to send out more purchase orders and collect more accounts receivables, right? So when you're so busy doing all this stuff, how do you come in and try to create this utopian peace amongst the muck? Because it's got to be very difficult dealing with business owners that, we're probably got ADHD, because I don't think you can become a small business owner without ADHD, right? So how do you resolve these competing forces in this holistic package?
Yeah, I mean, I like to take a look at let's take a step back. It is the tyranny of the urgent, right? As you're an entrepreneur. And so it is what's the most important thing today. And I tell people the most successful entrepreneurs, the most successful business people I've seen over all these years can do two things. Number one is they can take a look at the bigger picture goals and objectives that they're trying to get to, and they can balance that with the short-term goals and objectives. And you've got to be able to do both. And what most entrepreneurs do is they get sucked into the tyranny urgent, and they only ever focus in on the daily tasks in front of them. And they're not working on the bigger picture goals and objectives, the branding and positioning, the marketing sales process, and all these other things. And you've got to figure out a way to utilize your time where you're doing both short-term and longer-term initiatives to be able to help you get to your goals and objectives. And so we take our clients through a strategic planning process called the brainstorm session, and where we take a look at the bigger picture goals and objectives. What are the short-term things we have to do within the next 30, 60, 90 days, the next 6 months or year? But then what are we doing towards these bigger picture goals and objectives? And how do we kind of put together a priority list between driving current revenue ASAP, because that revenue is going to fuel your budget for next quarter, next month, the second half of the year, whatever. And so how do we put together that priority list and put together and say, here's the short-term things, here's the longer-term things, and how do we put this all in a fashion or a function that's going to meet both short-term and long-term goals and objectives? And what does that want to look like? And so that's kind of the process we go through, is determining how do we balance that out together.
Creating a brand story and letting the market be aware of your story has to start somewhere for you to become memorable, right?
Yep.
We all know memorable with brands. Coca-Cola, right? I think of Coca-Cola, I think of polar bears during Christmas, right? I'm on Christmas right now. I don't know, I'm thinking a few months ahead. But Budweiser, they have the horses in the sleigh, right? What creates a memorable brand?
Well, every business is different, right? I first and foremost, there's multi-facets of this. I love it and understand what are your unique differentiators? What are those value points? And then can you package it in a way that helps to communicate what that story wants to be? And so you've got to figure out and say, here's the structure or the framework of the story pillars, if you will, or that foundational elements of that story. And then what good brands like Coca-Cola do is they say, okay, well, here's this framework of what the brand foundation wants to be. Then how do we take it, provide creative elements, whether it be the content or the visual elements, and be able to communicate that story in a powerful fashion, in a really great packaged way that resonates with their customers. You're talking about a big consumer brand, and most of the people that all of us deal with are what I call small, medium-sized business or startups in small, medium-sized businesses, and they don't have the ability to build a brand. They've got to worry about driving immediate revenue to get to tomorrow. And so how do we build a brand? How do we tell a story that's going to resonate with their customers as soon as possible and drive revenue as soon as possible? And so there's a transition point along the way where you go from selling products and services as soon as you can to help building a bigger picture brand along the way. And there's a magical point along the way where you're helping to do that. And, I tell most, especially startups and small businesses, that we're worried about the brand. We're going to know what that wants to look like down the road. But today it's about driving immediate revenue to get us to tomorrow. And then how do we work towards building that brand? But most businesses got to worry about today and tomorrow to drive revenue. And they've got to keep that bigger picture brand in mind. And then how do we evolve that and grow it as we go along? And as we got more dollars in revenue to be able to build that and make it so it's really dynamic and really cool. So I
love
go ahead.
Everything you just said. Drive revenue first and then create the brand on the way. You don't know how many marketers we've had on this podcast that say, create your brand and then sell. That's all bullshit, because if we have no money, we can't hire you. It's just the truth. Forget about that very important piece, driving revenue.
Well, and we see it all the time, right? I hear like, oh, it's going to cost you $50, $100, a couple $100,000 to build your brand. And they're like, that's my entire budget to do everything, including paying my employees to do all my tech development or whatever. And they go, that's bullshit. I need to I got this much to work with. Drive revenue today, and I could pay, as my revenue grows, I'll have more and more money to invest and reinvest into my marketing and my sales and my brand. And that's what we see is, how do we grow together? How do we help them build not only the nuts and bolts of what they need to be able to drive revenue, but how do we grow that brand along the way that's going to really get them to where they want to be ultimately? But if you can't drive revenue today to get them to tomorrow, it doesn't matter.
So, Michael, help us out here. Give us some secrets, right? The audience, everybody's in different positions in this audience. We have people that are 20 million in revenue plus. We have some people that are just starting out. If you're just starting out, right, and you're really bootstrapping your business, you don't have the money to drive, to build a brand per se yet, what are some tactics that they can use immediately, like right after this episode, to start driving some revenue? What are some things they should be thinking about?
Well, here's what I do. I like to find out and say, who do you want to sell your product or service to? Identify who your customers are. And once you identify that, I love to say is, how do we identify what I call the lowest hanging fruits, the fastest, most economical way to reach those ideal target customers? And whether it be through email marketing, whether it be through digital paid or organic marketing or social media or whatever, figure out the most economical way to reach your ideal target customers and figure out, okay, is it developing? And I tell everybody, you got to have a database of who those targets are, or develop a database of who your target customers are. But then is it email marketing? Is it paid Google AdWords, or whatever the tactic is? I start with the most economical, lowest hanging fruit to be able to reach them in an economical way to be able to drive revenue. That's going to allow you to build upon other mediums or other tactics to be able to bring on more people that could buy your product or service. But start in the grassroots, start with that low hanging fruit of what's going to appeal most and the fastest to your ideal target customers. And it could be, I don't really care what the tactic is, to be honest with you. It's whatever tactic's going to be work the fastest and the most economical fashion to reach your ideal target customers.
So you've helped raise over $5 billion for companies out there, right? And
Correct.
you've advised over 40 acquisitions. A lot of people don't like bootstrapping it anymore, so they want to go out and raise money. So we were talking earlier before the show, and you were explaining the different types of decks that put together. And I just grouped it into all as a pitch deck, right? So I'm assuming, right, from our conversation, I've read probably a lot of the reports that you put out when you were working with, companies that were going to go IPO. And I'm wondering, what's the first type of deck somebody should put together? And walk us through the process on from a startup to a small, medium-sized business to an enterprise level, what decks they should be thinking about or where they should start.
Yeah. So I tell people the first thing I like you to do or start with, I don't care what size of businesses are, is putting together a pitch deck so that you are super clear yourself or your team on what it is your company is doing. What are your unique selling positions? What are your differentiators? What are those value points in your value proposition? Addressing who your ideal customers are, addressing how you're going to reach them effectively and timely, addressing kind of not only what that brand story wants to be, addressing what I call how you're going to make all this happen, developing a team and what that team looks like, developing a timeline of how you're going to grow this thing. So I love to start with a pitch deck so you get clarity amongst whether it be for yourself or for your team, who you are, what you're all about, what you stand behind, what your mission, vision, values are, and what are you trying to get accomplished and what by when. And I always like to start at the end in mind is we're developing this SaaS company. We want to, get to these goals and objectives. This is what's unique about it. Here's who we're appealing to. Here's our brand story. Here's how we're going to, define that, package that. Here's how we're going to, build that. Here's how we're going to take it to market. And here's the results we're going to get to. I love to start with that. And if you have clarity on what you're trying to get accomplished for yourself or for your team, that allows you to be able to take it into that same deck. You could use it to pitch a partner, pitch a strategic alliance, that type of thing. And then you would potentially add in what I would call the financial story section of it, where you put in together your performance or your financial projections of what you might look like over the 12, 24, 36, months and then years, and understanding what your how you're going to grow, what the revenue is going to produce, what your EBITDA is going to be, or your profit's going to be, what your cash flow is going to be, what your enterprise value is going to grow over a period of time. So you really understand the goals and objectives from a financial perspective on what those are all going to look like. And then you can take that to a potential investor. And then investors could look like a true, what I call financial, like a friends and family that you could raise money from. Or it could be someone within your industry, what we call like a strategic. So you've got two types of people you could go after to raise capital. And then same thing if you go to sell your company, you've got strategics and financials as well too. But you start with the pitch deck, you move on to the capital raise deck, and then there's going to be a point in time. And I tell people always refine it, always keep your pitch deck current, always keep your goals and objectives. And from a financial story perspective, up to date as you're growing, because you never know when someone's going to approach you and want to potentially invest in your company or acquire your company. And it's a lot of years to refine it and polish it off versus just call up. And I get these calls all the time. I need a deck in a week. What can you do? And it's like a week, not going to happen, So I like to say is always have one, always be prepared, whether it be for a pitch deck, a cap raise deck, and the management presentation that's when a company wants to potentially acquire you. And you say here's who we are. Here's how we stack up in the competitive landscape. Here's what all the great things we're doing. Here's how we fit really nicely, whether it be from a financial perspective and why you want to buy us just from a financial return perspective, or you want to buy us because we've got these relationships in a strategic investment and it plays really well with you as a potential strategic partner. And this is why you may want to buy us. So you've got that one as well too. And then when companies have gone public or they've got a bunch of investors, we put together either what we call like a analyst presentation. So they put that to analysts on Wall Street and saying, here's kind of the results we're producing with the investment dollars or the dollars we've raised. Or if you've got a bunch of investors, you could put together that investor presentation and say, here's what we're doing with the investments. And here's the returns we're producing for you and what we're doing. So there's all these different decks along the entire life cycle, whether it be a startup to all the way to an enterprise business. And I tell people have them together and keep them up to date on a consistent basis because it helps give you clarity, your team clarity, but also has the ability to pull it off the shelf, if you will, update a couple slides, and you're ready for whatever you need to get accomplished.
So you mentioned you can't get it done in a week. So what is it? What is the normal time?
Well, and the reason why I say that is because, we could potentially get the deck together, the look, but then I ask them, okay, do you have your financial projections together? Have you put it into a pro forma? Well, if it's their accounting team or their outside accounting firm or whatever, whoever's going to help them with it, that is not going to happen in a week. That's going to be weeks or months to be able to put together those financial projections. And so there's not just our portion of putting together a great story or designing it. Is all these different elements that go into it. And so, I say it takes more time to be able to put all these things together. So like the financial story is one of them. So you've got to have, whether it be a financial projections or a pro forma together to be able to go in there. But also, I also say, hey, have you put together a timeline of how you evolved, how you've grown over all this period of time, and what are those key milestones along the way that have gotten you to here? And they start thinking, it's like, oh my gosh, there's this, and there's this. And it takes time to put together all these elements to put together a great deck. And so that's why I tell people, if you do it consistently, all have all these things together, you can actually, if you need it in a week, we can update something in a week, but it's hard to develop something with all these really great elements within a week.
Everybody, all these brands have all these great stories around them and what they do. But let's be honest, right? Zuckerberg created Facebook because he wanted to meet girls. So when he sat down with Peter Thiel, what did he say? I want to meet girls. How much of this is created to compare to what the real truth is inside of these brands?
Yeah, good question. I always tell people, especially when you're pitching to investors, they see hundreds and hundreds of decks. And so you've got to have a story that is a great, compelling story, but you got to pass the bullshit test, right? And these investors and these strategic firms see decks every single day, and they can weed out pretty quickly which ones they think of what are real and which ones they've done their homework that can tell a compelling story, but they've done it in a way that they know they've done their homework and it's plausible. And they can also look at a deck and say, this is complete bullshit, because they say they're going to go from zero to $1 billion unicorn in 12 months. And they go, there's no freaking way that's going to happen. And so you've got to be able to tell a story that makes sense and that passes the bullshit detector. And that kind of lays out in a methodical fashion of not only the brand story, the technology, your targets, who the targets are, who you're going to sell this thing to, your product or your service. You've got to be able to put together a compelling story that really makes sense and that's viable. And then people can say, I can see this. I can see this in my mind, what they're telling me from not only a brand perspective, but making it come alive. These financial projections, I can buy into what these are really telling me. And they know within a matter of minutes by looking at a deck which ones they think are viable and which ones they think are complete bullshit and never going to happen.
Michael, you're absolutely right. But you just brought to our attention that sometimes the right amount of money can make an angel out of a devil. I'll just give an analogy that my dear partner gave a little while ago. If I were to come to you and walk into your office on Monday morning and I say, look, I got this great product. It's basically water, and I'm going to put in some coca leaves and some high fructose corn syrup, a little bit of vanilla extract. And don't worry about the diabetes. Don't worry about the child obesity. Don't worry about the rotting teeth. Don't worry about that. But this is a really, really cool product. In 2023, you'd probably throw me out of the office. But after 100 years of branding and really cool polar bears and, athletic endorsements, this product shines like the North Star, right? Yep. So yes, you're right. There is bullshit in the spiel, but sometimes the bullshit gets lost in the spiel.
Right. Absolutely. No, and so nowadays, there's so many companies looking to raise money, or so many companies looking to get acquired. And so how do you tell a believable story? But your story is also got to stand out too, right? And so there's a fine line there. And let me go back to the question you asked a little bit ago is, how do you put together the story that makes sense? But also, how do you put together a story that's going to stand out? And I tell people, you've got to, it's like building it's like a research paper. You've got all to have this supporting documentation and these facts to support your story and your case. So it's built on it's like that paper. And so you've got to have done your research, you've got to do your homework, and you've got to be able to put together this case of why your story not only makes sense, it resonates, and they think that what you're going to do financially is going to make sense, but then you got to make it look great. And so it's this fine line between, maybe like in software, we call it vaporware, right? It's going to do all these really cool things. Well, you got to be able to see it's going to do these cool things, but you got to be real and you got to be practical. But you also can't undersell yourself. So how do you put just enough shine on, if you will, but also back it with substance and with a methodical, fact-driven exercise that says, okay, I can believe this. Yeah, there's probably some bullshit in here, but there's enough factual documentation and a well-thought-out case study and a well-thought-out story and financial story that I can see this sugar water with cocoa leaves and vanilla extract, that these guys could really make that happen. And that leads to the next part is you've got to find that fine line between a practical story, being creative, but then you got to have the team and the CEO that's passionate about it and could sell the concept, but not do it in a complete bullshit fashion, but be passionate about the story, but have really thought out and really well tell a story and really passionate about it, but saying, those guys believe it. They've done their homework. They know what they're talking about. I believe in them. I'm going to invest in them because I think they've done their homework. They've done a great job of packaging it. They've done a great job of researching it, put together what the projections and what it wants to be. I love their passion. I love that they've done their homework. I'm all in. I'm gonna go for it.
Michael, let's talk about passion. All right, you've been doing this since the 90s, since the .com era and the .com bust. And for those of you that are listening to this and not watching it, Michael's got veins popping out of his head. He's speaking with such exuberance and passion. What's your secret? What drives you? How have you kept that competitive edge and fire inside for all these decades? And not just the fire, but kept you on top of your game?
I like what I do. I like solving problems. And I'm a unique, I'm not a creative. It's really interesting because I'm not a creative. I'm not a designer. I don't write content. And then my wife, who's a accounting person, says, "Oh my God, you tell people numbers. You're full of crap." But I got this unique perspective because I know the financial, I know the creative side, I know the financial pieces. I can look at a performer, I can tell, I can mark it up. I know all that part of it. And I'm this unique person that loves to solve problems. And I love to tell stories. I love to take a look at people's business plan or their performa and then say, how can we package this? How can we take what you've got and put it into a brand or put it into a deck or put together and say, who's our customers and how do we put together a sales and marketing process and how do we find that low hanging fruit and get you to where you're driving revenue? I love the challenge for me is what I love. I love solving problems. I love it. Like, here's a really good example. I was at a UTV customer. They really do. They customize UTVs. They jack them up. They put these giant tires and rims, and they soup them out, and they turbocharge these UTVs, off-road vehicles. And they came to me and said, we pivoted, and what you're doing now is it's producing revenue. And they go, it's freaking working. And I love hearing that from a client that, and things earlier this year weren't working so great, but we figured out and nothing ever works great in marketing. It always is you've got to try things out. You've got to test things. You've got to, test your brand, your message, your brand story. You've got to test and figure out what resonates and what works, what doesn't work. But when you figure out the magic formula, the magic message, the magic deck that resonates and produces results, that's the aha moment that is awesome. And I love that, and I live for that. And that's what drives me and keeps me going is, solving those problems, making clients happy and producing results where it's a win-win scenario for all of us.
So, Michael, you started a company, you were acquired, started another company, you're still going. What's next?
Well, nowadays I'm still doing what I'm doing. Nowadays I'm on a couple different boards for different companies. I'm getting more involved in a real estate investment firm because it was a friend of mine, and I helped him package his brand story. I helped him identify and put together a deck that resonated. I helped him refine his model. I called his model. And I've helped him identify who are our potential investors. And now I'm kind of leading the charge to help and understand who would those investors be. And we're raising money. And so that's cool. We're solving a problem. We're generating results. And, it's funny for me because I can do what I'm doing on advising and helping on these boards and doing these things. And I can do it part-time, and I can have fun, and I can do all these cool challenges. And I told my wife, I was like, what I'm doing from a branding perspective or cap raise decks or advising companies how to raise capital or how to get acquired and get all these multiples, I can do that for a long time. And I can solve these problems, and doing what I've done and selling my company to be a part of IPO and reporting to Wall Street. There's not very many people out there. And so I can do this for a long time, and I'm going to do it for a long time because it's fun and it keeps things going for me. And I do over the next several years, I kind of want to slow down a little bit, have a little more fun, but I love the challenge, and I don't want to ever give that fun and that excitement up.
Thank you so much for being here. We want to be respectful of your time, but before we go, can you tell the audience where they can find Brand Iron and how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, it's brandiron.net online. We're on LinkedIn. It's Brand Iron as well too, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Michael Doyle. So Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, guys.
Michael, thank you so much. One question before I let you run. What's your favorite brand of all time?
Oh, my favorite brand of all time? That's a great question. I grew up a kid in San Diego. I was a surfer kid. So for 40 years now, I still love like the Quicksilver brand. And it has evolved and grown for years and years and years. And then they spin off Roxy. So they've developed a brand just for women and girls, right? And they've evolved and grown over all this time. And now they have like a silver edition for older guys like me. And so, it's so cool where you see a brand that's evolved and grown and continues to evolve and grow over all these years. And so I'm still a surfer kid at heart, and I love those kind of things.
Michael, thank you so much. Everybody else, that's a wrap of the Liquid Launch Project. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the show, and make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you on the next episode of the Liquid Launch Project.